I'm making this game, right, called Synth Beasts, and it's basically like Zelda, but instead of using items, you capture Pokemon-like creatures and use their abilities. And so I released a demo for it, and people really liked it, but about 4 months ago I thought to myself, what if it had a badge system like Hollow Knight? So what I decided to do was make a completely separate game and reuse the code to make Synth Beasts much better. So now that I was armed with a goal, I picked out a Halloween theme for a game, gave myself 2 non-consecutive weeks, and that's how Wanted Shadows, which just released, was born. On the first day, I did something super basic. I simply copy-pasted the original game's project files and started deleting everything that I didn't need. So the level system, the NPCs, and everything else was removed, and then I was left with this blank level that I could do some testing on. It was a bit too blank though, so I added a bunch of enemies that don't move or attack to test out my own player attacks. Everything was looking like it was working well, but then I noticed one problem. Can you see it? Well, it's got to do with this stamina bar. It's round, right? And the problem is that I want it to be easily upgradable. And the intention with this is so that you can see when you get more stamina really easily just from the stamina graphics. And I could do what Zelda does and add extra circles on the outside, but I really like how the Souls games have your HP and SP bars get much wider as you get stronger, so I replicated that because it just has such a great power fantasy feel. Then, the final thing I did for this first day was make it such that you could shoot in the direction of your mouse. So for Synth Beasts, you could only shoot in the direction you were moving in, kind of like the top-down Zelda games, and I wanted to have it like this originally for the simplicity of controls, but it didn't really make sense for Wanted Shadows, since it's a way more combat-heavy game. And so I implemented it, and what surprised me is that it felt really good. Maybe I should just add this to Synth Beasts as well. The first thing I did on the second day was add decorations to the blank level, and I was pretty happy with how it turned out. I then added some enemies that didn't just stand around and do nothing to get a better sense of how the movement would work with the dashing, aiming, and attacking. It felt great, so I went ahead and made a little mini boss that jumps and lands with an earthquake to progress even more with the combat system. And now, here's a question that I'm sure a lot of you probably have. Where the heck am I getting all of these sprites from? Well, at my studio, we're making a top secret, unannounced RPG that I won't show off much of, but these are the more Halloween-y enemies that our artist, Martin, made. So that's another reason I was able to make this game so fast. Not only was it fully based on code I already made, but in a roguelike setting, the art was also already done for something else. Either way, after I added that cool boss, I also adapted the melee weapon system from my other game, and it also felt great with a new aiming system that I implemented on the first day. I started off day 3 with adjusting the camera to make it a bit more top-down, since I got some feedback that it was hard to aim with the perspective camera. On top of that, I also added controller support, and because of that, the game actually already runs perfectly on Steam Deck. And figuring that out took a while with all the code that I already had in place, so I didn't do too much else on this day, but I did have the time for one final thing, and that was the addition of XP pickups. So now all the enemies drop these purple gems, and it will set up really well for the upgrade system that I add on day 4. So riding off of the addition of the XP pickups on day 3, I added the upgrade system both in terms of the UI and the code that allowed the upgrades to actually improve your character. And since I was already doing a bunch of UI work for the upgrades, I took the opportunity to make the general UI of the game so it now had a pause screen, a main menu, and other cool stuff like that. To see how testers felt about the new additions, I gave some of them a new build, and there was a feedback that it felt a bit weird to get hit since the enemies could double hit you or stick to you and make it kind of hard to get away, so because of that I added this cool effect that pushes enemies away, and thankfully that fully fixed the issue. Day 5, in my opinion, had one of the most important additions of the whole game, but before I get to it, I added a bunch of extra upgrades to flesh out the progression, as well as some extra enemies, but then the most important addition, it's this sprite drop shadow effect. I know it seems super random and not important at all, but this effect makes the characters pop out of the background so much more, and it allows for faster reactions since the important elements of the game, so the enemies and the pickups, are more visible. I even gave this drop shadow effect a name. I'm not really sure if it's been done before, correct me if I'm wrong, but I haven't seen it, and I've named it Sprite Ambient Occlusion, since it's similar to ambient occlusion, which is a method that you can use to get more accurate shadows without much graphical power. Near the start of the development of Wanted Shadows, I made a wave system that spawned enemies on a timer, but the actual enemies that were spawned until now were just placeholders. They were just the most convenient ones to spawn for my testing. But day 6 was when all of that changed. I finally got to doing some wave design, and I made a final version of what enemies would spawn and when. Since I finally had something playable from start to finish, it made sense to start work on the progression system, and so that's what I did. How it works is that whenever you play a run, whenever you win or lose, you get this key currency, and these keys can be used to buy characters, weapons, and powers. The characters and weapons, they're pretty self-explanatory, right? But you may be asking yourself, what are powers? Well, basically, they're special effects that you can equip one of before you start a run. Here's a look at the ones that ended up being in the game, and there are some pretty basic ones, like just increasing how much damage you do, but there are some more complex ones that are pretty cool, like allowing you to dash even when you don't have stamina, so they can get pretty overpowered. On day 7, I added a bunch more powers to the game, and added the final boss of the level that I had finished 2 days before, and it's this cool looking vampire dude. It's a pretty basic one since it just dashes around, but it works well as a kind of test for the end of the run to see how powerful your build ended up being. Not much else was done on this day since I was really focused on just adding tons of powers. After having added so much of the core of the game, I decided to send it out to a bunch of other people to test, and I felt like the waves needed an extra enemy that would pressure players to move around more, and that's when I added this little cute bomb enemy. What it does is it bounces around towards you, and it's really quite fast, but if you manage to defeat it with many nearby enemies, it explodes and deals massive damage to all the enemies that surrounded it. And a funny quirk about this character is that the reason it bounces instead of walking is because I just don't have a walk animation for it, right? What's cool though is that the bounce actually complements the enemy super well, because since it's super fast, it needs to stand out in a group of enemies, and there's no better way to do that than to make it jump super high into the air. The bomb enemy was basically the last thing I needed to add for the game to be fully playable, and so on days 9 and 10, I added 2 extra levels to give the game even more content. This is what the second level looks like. It's kind of like a Japanese-inspired haunted mansion with some different enemies than the first level, and the third and final level is a lava world that also has tons of different enemies. I won't go over every single enemy that I added or every single difference between the 2 new levels and the original one, because I want you all to play the game if you're interested in what you've seen so far, but you can catch a bit of these changes from the footage at a glance. Oh, and by the way, the game just cost $149 US and has over 10 hours of gameplay, so it's really a total steal. It's out right now, so get it if it seems like your kind of thing. There's a link to the Steam page in the description. And here we are on the final 4 days. What I did on these was add some extra upgrades to really make the runs more varied, and I even gave each weapon and each character their own set of unique upgrades that you can get if you beat mini bosses, so that addition gives a whole new layer of strategy to your choices. But beyond that, I added some more final powers, and then the last thing I did was add Steam achievements to the game. So that's the end of the 14 days, but how did the game actually do? Well, while the game is out right now for just $149 US, there's a Steam link below, I actually have no clue because as I'm recording this, the game's not out yet, right? I'm doing this before it's out. But if you'd like me to make a video about the post-launch feelings, let me know in the comments, but for now, I'll see you later.